Hello and welcome to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. That would be me, your host. And as usual, I have my wonderful Pete's Coffee. It is a cafe Americano with a little bit of milk and some honey, because don't we always need a little bit of sugar with our caffeine? So get your beverage of choice together. I don't care what you have, although I will note that it is just a little before 10 o'clock on the West Coast. So that would mean that it is not socially appropriate to have alcohol in your beverage of choice. But because you are a free American, if you want to do it, you can do it. But I would just encourage you, please keep your alcoholic drinking confined to the hours after 5 in the afternoon. But no matter what you have in your beverage of choice, let's do that simultaneous sip, shall we? Okay, get ready. Do you have your beverage of choice? Such good caffeine, such good caffeine. Hopefully you had a great weekend, as I did, and you face the week with a lot of energy. So the title of today's episode is Be Useful. What does that mean to be useful? And the question I ask is, why don't we talk about that more often? It seems like more often these days, we're talking about how do we be happy? And I'm not sure that talking about being happy is the way to really be happy. I think that maybe the better route is to ask yourself the question, how can I be useful to others? And in being useful to others, then I'll be happy. Because I've come to the conclusion, after all my decades of life, that the greatest joys in life come from your interactions with other people. And that is one thing which I make a central part of this broadcast, which is the importance of your human contacts with people. So notice how I'm different than much of the commentary out there. Much of the commentary that's out there is encouraging you to have good thoughts in your brains. Do you think the right thoughts about things like immigration, past injustices, and what we're doing in the world? Okay, all of these are fine things to think about, but in terms of what you can actually accomplish, if I have the greatest thought in the world, but I'm not acting on it, that's just useless. And I don't want to be useless. I want to be useful. So how can you be useful? Well, what does science show us? Science shows us that one of the greatest predictors of your physical and psychological health is your relationships with others. Okay? And so I think in order to have a good relationship with other people, you need to be concerned about them, and they have to feel that you're on their side. Now, one of the things that I had come to a realization about maybe a couple years ago was my mother-in-law did this really admirable thing, which just made me stop and think that maybe I needed to change the way I do things. And so my mother-in-law has has 6 kids, and as you can imagine, she has many grandchildren too. And how do you have a connection with so many people? Well, what she had done was that rather than just waiting for all the family events and using that as the time to connect with people, what she decided to do was she decided to make, lunch dates, dinner dates, brunch, breakfast dates, whatever you want to do it, but with all of her grandchildren. And so just one on one, because she felt, when you get together at family events, that's something that, there's a great value to that. But one of the things that I often found is that family events, sometimes when there's a lot of people, the conversation is just surface. You're not getting deep. Okay. I think to have really good conversations with people, you probably need to just have the two of you, or, if there's a couple or something like that. But, I find that the best discussions where I'm okay. Okay. There I'm back. Okay. So sorry, I just hit a button. So I found that the deepest connections that I'll make with people are when I'm just with them. When there's not a crowd around, where I can reveal vulnerabilities, I can ask them questions that, they wouldn't like to be asked in public, but because it's just the two of us, I can get a little bit deeper. And so for the past couple of years, what I've been trying to do with the younger members of my family and some of the older members of my family is to make the time to just go and visit with them, to just, drive a couple hours so we can have lunch, something like that. Invite myself over for a night, and I just find that something different happens when you are physically sitting across from people at a meal, which you don't get over the phone. And so that is part of what I'm trying to do with my life, which is I am making the time every week to do something expressly social, and I'm not pushing forward anything. Let's say I have a weird political thought, or I have a, something from my books I want to talk about. No, no, that's not the purpose of it. What I'm doing is I am going and visiting with people for the express purpose of finding out what's going on with their life. Because I think that in our modern world, we're kind of cut off from each other. And technology has done a lot of wonderful things, but we're just not communicating the way we did 20 years ago before social media was around. It seems like social media is hijacking our brain for that social fix, and it's not really that that satisfying, that nourishing of a connection. And so, what I'm doing is I'm just going old school. All right, I'm gonna get together with somebody for coffee, for lunch. I'm gonna sit and have conversations with them. I'm gonna reveal confidences, tell them, I'm kind of worried about this. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because, in revealing my vulnerability, that generally allows people to reveal their own vulnerabilities. And, I want that connection. I'm sorry. In some sense, this is selfish on my part because I want to be happier physically and happier psychologically. And all the research shows what that means is you actually have to connect with people. You actually have to be sitting across from them in the same physical space. And I think we understood this much better in past decades. And, maybe we just didn't have a choice. We had to be healthy. But now, I think in this era of social media, we have to objectively take the time to go out and be social with each other. And you know, all of us have our stories, which we like to tell. And for the most part, we don't feel like we are getting our story out. And so it's just so healing to a person for them to be able to tell their story. And so, in trying to be useful, what I'm trying to be is take the time for those experiences to happen, for people not to be racing, not to be rushing, but just to sit down and say, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on?" I'm not interested in any arguments or fights. If it seems appropriate, I'll share some knowledge about something that might be helpful. But if people are not open to it, look, I'm not going to push it. My goal is to be a useful human being to them. And it got me thinking about how I believe our society has gone wrong in the past couple decades. And I wanted to bring up some specific examples of things that I think are driving people apart. There's this expression, mansplaining, and it's supposed to be men over explaining things to women in a derogatory manner. And when I first heard about it, I was just like, "Oh, that's kind of funny, all right." But the more I reflected on it, I really thought that's a negative thing. That the very use of that word, mansplaining, to me seems like hate speech. And so let me sort of spin this out as to why I think mansplaining is a form of hate speech. One of the things that I think is unique about men is I think that we really like to solve problems. And so, this, I should probably spend a little bit of time talking about the differences between men and women from my perspective. From my perspective, men and women are about 75% the same. That means without thinking about it, we understand each other at about a C plus level. Okay. And so that's where we start. But I think there's about 25% between men and women, which is completely different because of our hormones. We value different things. And one of the problems that I've seen when relations are not good between men and women is that the men want the women to be like men, and the women want the men to be like women. And this just doesn't work. It's a bad idea for you to think that a woman should be 100% man and a man should be 100% woman. No, there's about 75%, which is the same between us. But then there's this 25%, which I think is completely different. And men need to take some time to listen to women to understand that 25%, which is why whenever I hear a man saying something derogatory about women in general, I just go, "No, buddy, that's wrong. You ain't getting it. Yes, you have correctly identified that a woman, a typical woman, is different than a typical man. Got it. But you got to go further. Your job as a human being is to understand both sides. Same thing with women. Whenever I hear a woman saying something about all men are this way, all men are that way, I just go, "Honey, you ain't you ain't winning the game. Winning the game is understanding each other. Winning the game means you need to take the time to understand that different perspective. So that brings me back to mansplaining. Mansplaining is a derogatory term. What it does is it devalues the unique contribution of men, which is we like to solve problems. So if you want a problem solved, it might be a good idea to consult a man about that. Now, if you just want to think about it for a while, and this is, women like to think more deeply about things, and that's fine. That's part of that unique difference. But value the male penchant for wanting to solve problems quickly. So whenever that expression mansplaining is used, what I hear is sexism. Mansplaining is a sexist word. It's no different than the cruel jokes about women that some men have told and I've overheard. And they always know I don't like negative jokes about women. Women are different than men. Yes, men are different than women too. Get over it. In fact, you should celebrate it because part of the richness of life is understanding people who are different than you. But that requires you taking the time. So remember, be aware, men and women are different and people are different. They'll have different perspectives, which gets me back to my main point about being useful. And this is something that I see as having changed in our political conversations. When I was growing up in California, there was a very strong liberal streak, always been in California. And it's not surprising that it would be, because in order to be innovative, you have to be the opposite of conservative, which is let's kind of keep things the same. Okay, so let's just kind of go that way. I consider myself a conservative, but I also understand that if you're going to be innovative, if you're going to be creative, you're going to need to free your mind to go to some places which you're not sure if they're great or not, but you have to consider them. So I'm going to share 3 stories about how I believe that liberals have really gone off the rails and are contributing to a great deal of harm in our society. And I say this with all the love in my heart for liberals, but I think that now, 10 years into the Trump era, it's important that I say these things and that liberals hear them. I say this with all the love in my heart for liberals because I've been surrounded by liberals all my life. Some of my best friends have been liberals. Some of the people who I consider, my dearest adopted family are liberals. And yet I feel like you've forgotten some of the wonderful liberal principles that I really admired when I was young. So Trump wins the presidency in 2016. He is not expected to win. I think that the mainstream media attack against Trump, who had been sort of a middle of the road guy, it may surprise you to know that as early as the year 2000, Trump had appeared in the Advocate magazine arguing in favor of gay marriage. And for most of his life, Trump was a Democrat. And that's kind of what you would do as a businessman in New York City because it was so overwhelmingly Democratic. And he was one of the biggest supporters of Jesse Jackson's presidential run. And, he was kind of beloved by the liberal community. But when he realized that the best way to run was as a Republican and it was most in tune with his views, a lot of things he needed to change, especially the penchant for war, um, uh, and the fact that the Republicans were not really that supportive of blue collar workers and manufacturing, and that was something that needed to change. But in American politics, and so for some of my younger viewers, this may sound really strange, but it didn't used to be that we hated each other because of who we voted for. That changed dramatically in 2016. I'm going to give you 3 examples of things that I personally witnessed or things that I worked on, which showed me that in 2016, things changed. So, as you know, for 20 years, I was a middle school science teacher in California. So, I'm a public school teacher. I am an enthusiastic supporter of the idea of public education, the idea that no matter who you are, you come to our country and we're going to educate you. I'm also a big believer that since it is a public institution, I am supposed to be free of any political beliefs. I don't want to push my political beliefs because that's not part of the education process. Um, I also want to be really sensitive to the fact that there are people of different faiths. So, I'm comfortable saying, like, look, I am a Catholic, and so I have a Christian worldview, but that doesn't mean I don't accept and respect other points of view. I'm just telling you who I am, and I think that identifying us as who we are is important. And I've even been throughout my teaching career absolutely nonpartisan in my teaching, and it was always kind of funny when presidential elections would come up, and the students would ask me, Mr. Heckenlively, who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for? And I would always say the same thing. Well, I think the Democrats have some good things to say, and I think the Republicans have some good things to say. And the kids would always go, no, no, you got to tell us who you're voting for. And I would say again, well, I think the Democrats have some good things to say, and the Republicans have some good things to say. And the kids would keep trying to guess. And so they'd say things like, I know you vote Republican because you dress nice. And I go, oh, well, that's a certain point of view. And others would go, I know you're going to vote Democrat because you're a teacher and all the teachers vote Democrat. And I would go, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to think. But I would never tell them what I was, because I really do believe that public education should be a political free zone in which, we can certainly talk about things, but strong opinions from the teachers, I think, should be discouraged. I think that, like actors, the kids should be able to project their own beliefs onto the teacher, and the teachers should teach how to think, but not what to think. So that's my view of public education, and I understand, I was a union representative, and, I could regale you with stories about how the teachers union are always supporting Democrats, and I think that's a terrible mistake. I don't think that the teachers unions should be supporting either political side. I just think it's a bad move, because they're showing that they are partisan. So leave that aside for a minute. The day after Trump wins the presidential election in 2016, there is a science department meeting. So we've got probably like 6 or 7 science teachers in there. And so, we're talking about, okay, the curriculum, here's what we're going to do. And the principal walks in. And So let me talk about this principal. This principal, her sort of personality was almost like an Ellen DeGeneres type. So, yes, she was lesbian, but she wanted to be like that happy, friendly lesbian. And, that was cool. That was fine. No problem with that. But you know how Ellen DeGeneres was just, everybody was like, oh, Ellen, she is the nicest person. Oh, we just love Ellen. She's just wonderful, isn't? I know she got into problems, um, but that was just sort of the way that this principal portrayed herself. I want to be everybody's friend. Well, she walks in to that department meeting, puts her hands on her hips, and goes, "Well, fuck, who needs a hug?" And I thought to myself, what the hell is going on here? I'm at a public institution. This is supposed to be nonpartisan. Whether I like Trump or I like Hillary Clinton, shut the hell up about it at school. That's what you're supposed to do. That's the example you're supposed to set. And I thought, what the hell is going on here? This just became upside down world. Educators are supposed to try to understand things. And here she is dismissing half of the country who voted for Trump. And knowing that there are like 6 or 7 people there, I would have thought she would at least have some understanding that maybe there were a couple of us there who voted for Trump. And I thought, something really strange has entered our political world. So that's incident number 1. Incident number 2 happened at my book club. And so, yeah, I belong to 2 book clubs. One is a general fiction book club. The other is a mystery book club. And so I go there expecting to talk about the book. And this one woman has to go on this tirade about how terrible it was that Trump won. And then she says, for the next election, I'm really going to go out there and campaign against Trump. I was like, oh, okay, that's your right as an American. That's fine. And then she says something which, even as I reflect on it 10 years from the time, I'm so angry about it. He says, and on Facebook, I defriended all of my family members and friends who voted for Trump. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, let me spin this out. You weren't happy with the results of the election. Got it. You are going to spend a lot more time in the next election trying to get your preferred candidate elected. You have also defriended every person who voted the way you didn't want. How is it possible for you to have any effect on people who voted the opposite way the next time if you're not talking to them? What you should do is you should spend some time talking to those people and asking them what were the reasons that you voted the way you did, and not in an accusatory manner, just in an information gathering. Is there something I missed? I'm confused. The media that I read tells me that Trump is the greatest threat to democracy since Hitler. Why did you see it differently? Why aren't you just curious? So those are 2 personal examples to me of pretty significant things. My job and one of my social groups, acting in ways which are not consistent with the way I remember liberals acting in the 70s and 80s. In fact, I'm old enough to remember that in the 70s and 80s, if you ran across somebody who had a completely different point of view, that was cool. You wanted to talk to them. That's great. Hey, I see it this way. Tell me why you see it differently. I can remember lots of those conversations. Okay. Third thing. So, um, shortly after the 2016 election, uh, uh, I ended up. No, no, I'm sorry. It was it was in 2020. Um, I wrote this book, Google Leaks, with Zach Voorhees. Now, Zach Voorhees had a very similar uh, thing happen to him when he was an engineer at Google. And so, just so you know, Zach Voorhees had kind of been an Occupy Wall Street kind of guy after the 2008 financial collapse. So very much of a liberal bent. And by the time 2016 rolled around, he was really kind of turned off by politics. And so, he didn't like Hillary. He thought Trump was kind of a clown, but so not really engaged. And like a lot of people are not engaged with politics when they look at politicians. So just kind of neutral about the election. And so then he wakes up day after the election. Trump has won. He didn't even stay up to see who had won. And he's just kind of amused, like, oh my God, Trump won. Nobody expected him to win. This is kind of funny. And then he goes to his job at Google. And so this is one of the most important places in the world, right? Because Google is supposed to be organizing all the world's information. You would expect that these would be curious people, not partisans. Well, he goes in to work at Google, and it's like somebody died. People are crying. They've got counselors there. Announcement is made that, hey, if you need to take some time off because you're upset about the election, please feel free. This is nuts. This does not lead to psychological health, because what you're doing is you're essentially saying half of the country is my enemy. And it's not that I seek to understand them. It's not just like, are there some things I just don't get? It's they're bad. They're evil. That's not psychologically healthy, people. And so I'm just giving you those three ideas, which is or those three examples, that something changed. And when I consider it, I don't see it as something political. I feel it's something dark. I feel this is evil, because whenever I'm being asked to consider a segment of people as irredeemably evil, I'm not learning anything. And in fact, I would say that that goes to the dark angels of human nature. And somebody's got to understand that. And so for quite a long time, I've been thinking about the puppet masters of the public, the puppet masters in the mainstream media who are making us hate each other. And so I always try to perform my own mental hygiene. So, for example, if I was not being careful with my own mental hygiene, I would look at the election of democratic socialists in large cities as something to hate and to say is evil. And I'm really not doing that. What I'm doing is I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand, why is it that people are voting for these democratic socialists? What is it about those who are voting which is making them feel so disillusioned with our current system that they think that this is the way to go. So if I run across a democratic socialist, I'm not going to hate them. I'm not going to tell them that their vote is setting up concentration camps in our country. What I'm going to say is, I really understand how you, as a young person, because they are overwhelmingly young, um, feel this way. I understand how the universities have created this horrible system of student debt so that you graduate with a degree that is not useful because you've been encouraged to do that. You're saddled with debt and you're not getting the job that you want and you're not making the money you want. And you see no possible way for you to eventually one day own a home. And so I'm not going to hate the democratic socialists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to acknowledge that they raise a number of really good points. And it's incumbent upon people like me, especially those who have a larger microphone, because of the books that I write, to say, we need to listen to these democratic socialists. I don't think that their solutions are the right ones, but they're raising some really important issues, and we have to come up with some better solutions. So I've told you that this broadcast is about being useful. So if you ever find that certain forces or individuals or your media is telling you to hate people who think differently, they're not helping you be useful. They're not helping you be psychologically or physically healthy. The best thing you can do is to connect with your fellow human beings, share your thoughts in a respectful manner, and listen to their thoughts in a respectful manner. I think that we can figure all of this out, but we have to start with the premise that every one of us and every one of our opinions is important. So that's what I have for you today. I hope that this is not the best part of your day. I hope the best part of your day is when you have conversations with real people in front of you, not listening to a devilishly handsome dude on the internet like me. All right. Have a great day, America.